Hello everyone, Pulse here to bring you yet another episode of Delving Deep ESO. Now in this episode we continue our little venture to find out all we can about the class skill lines that will more than likely be available in Elder Scrolls Online upon release. Now finally we've come to the last of the classes, the ever elusive Nightblade, which is kind of in character considering the archetypes it's trying to follow. Now, before I begin, let me reiterate, pretty much for the 1000th time, that this information is not confirmed by Zenimax, and it's rather just a collective of information from numerous sources from around the interwebs and from beta testers, and just the testaments from those players. Secondly, any numbers that are mentioned, and I'll try my best to keep them off of the video, but they will slip in there for sure. All of those numbers should be taken with a bucket and a half of salt because, as with any MMO, the numbers can and will be tweaked by Zenimax as they see fit in order to balance their game. Now finally, I wanted to mention that unlike previous information, the stuff that we have to go off of for the Nightblade isn't nearly as laid out and as neat as some of the other information that I was able to gather up here. So the order in which I'm giving these things doesn't necessarily mean that's the order we're going to earn them in the game. So maybe the first ability I give you could be the last one you earn in terms of level requirements. But let's get past all the boring stuff, guys. Let's get into the first skill line for the Nightblade, shall we? I know you guys really want to know what is up this class's sleeves. Now, the first skill line we have for this class is called Assassination. Now, the ultimate ability for this skill line is called Deathstroke. It's got a slight range, only just above the melee range, really. It's got a pretty cheap ultimate cost compared to other ultimates we've gone over, and it's going to deal a good chunk of damage. It's going to reduce healing received on the target by about 75% or 3/4, and it's going to increase damage based on how much ultimate you have. Now, this one is interesting because it has such a low ultimate cost, like written here, but the second kind of tally mark there that it's going to have increased damage based on available ultimate, does that mean it's just going to be one of those ability like you need this much, but once you go beyond that it's just going to use all of it and then it's going to produce tons of extra damage? I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it will, because otherwise it'll just be an ability you can spam and will do tons of damage once you get it to like the highest peak of your ultimate bar, and it's either going to, you waste the first chunk until you get to the upper tier of your ultimate bar, or you're going to be able to use it over and over again and just have tons and tons of damage output when you get a full ultimate bar. So I expect it's just going to be one of those, it drains the whole damn thing and you just do tons of upfront damage if you manage to save up that amount. Now on to the active abilities, shall we? The first one here is called Assassin's Blade. This is going to use just a tiny bit of magicka. It's going to do a little bit of magic damage, but on low health targets it's going to do an additional 270% damage. Now I wanted to mention the percentages on that because 270% damage additional is ludicrous. But what this means is the Assassin's Blade ability is going to be very similar to kind of like the backstabs of previous fantasy MMOs, where the roguish type character is able to just do tons of front-loaded damage with an ability used in the right situation. So this is going to be kind of like the execute style ability, but for the Nightblade, they'll be able to just do tons and tons of damage if the target is low, and it's going to be a very quick burst down once they hit that low health threshold. Now the next ability is called Blur. This is going to be a self buff essentially. For 20 seconds or so, attackers have a good miss chance when they go to hit you. So for about a third of a minute or so, you're going to have a substantial chance of dodging all the attacks that are thrown at you. This is a pretty interesting ability. I'm not really sure how it fits in with the whole theme of the skill line we have here, but let's move on, shall we? Now the next one we have is called Haste, which is going to, for a good number of seconds, increase the attack speed of your heavy and light attacks by about 30% or so. Now this is pretty substantial because even though I said ignore the numbers, I have to say 17 seconds here on the haste, which is huge, like huge. MMO terms, 17 seconds is way beyond anything when it comes to like a haste or a speed buff in terms of cooldowns or any of that stuff that's typical in MMOs. That extra attack speed is crazy. And it is going to be tons of damage. We'll see how that one gets tweaked. I expect that one to either be the buff itself doesn't increase weapon damage that much over time, and it's going to get buffed up by the amount that you're swinging quickly, like the base damage for weapons. But at its current, I think that's going to be a really powerful ability. Now the next one up here is called Mark Target. This is going to require a high health target. It makes sure to state that here, and you're going to mark the target for death, as you would expect with the name of that. And with the marked target, your attacks are going to ignore all of their resistances, but their attacks in turn are going to ignore all of yours. And then killing the marked target heals the Nightblade for a little bit less than half of their health. This is a really strong ability, and it's one that's kind of seen in other MMOs, but not nearly as interesting as this, with the negatives attached to it, where they will be able to ignore all of your resistances. I feel like in PvE, it's not going to matter that much. This is going to be one of those, you throw it up on the target and you just do tons and tons of damage the whole encounter, essentially. But in PvP, this makes this ability a little bit more balanced, because you cannot just use this and just burst down somebody who's attacking you without worrying of your own health and your own safety. I think that's a nice little addition, and they've done well to do that throughout these. I'm pretty sure I've made sure to notice that and point it out to you guys, that they've done pretty good at balancing the abilities with the negatives on these. Now the next one here is the last active for the assassination skill line, and this one is called Teleport Strike. Now you're going to use this, it's got a little bit of a distance on it, as you would expect by the name. You're going to step through the shadows, appear next to your target, you're going to do a little bit of damage to the enemy, and then you're going to stun them for about a second or a second and a half or so. Now this one is typical roguish kind of ability that you unlock, usually in the later levels, where you just are able to kind of blink or teleport next to the target or behind the target, and then it just allows you to initiate. It's kind of an expected skill for this class, to be honest, but now we know for sure it's in the assassination tree, and it has a little stun on it, which is interesting, because usually these are coupled with like a stealth. There's no mention of stealth at all in this tree so far, and the stun is there instead. Now onto the passives for the tree. The first one is called Executioner. As you would expect with all these, they're going to affect yourself. This one is going to allow you, when killing an enemy with an assassination ability, restore some magicka over a couple seconds. This is just going to bolster your magicka intake essentially while in combat. The next one you have is Hemorrhage. Increase bonus critical strike damage by 20% or so while you have an assassination ability slotted. This is going to be a pretty good one if you use any assassination at all. Odds are you're going to want to use this passive as well. Now let me see. The next one here is Master Assassin. This is going to increase damage done while invisible or crouched by 10%, and successful crouched attacks stun for longer. Now this is the only mention of stealthing or crouching or getting the upper hand by being invisible, other than the teleport strike stun thing. So I guess there is going to be some usefulness in this tree for going in and out of stealth, but there's no mention of skills that give you the invisibility. So it's all going to be based on the skillful use of the crouch mechanic in the game. So I imagine people who use the assassination tree are going to have to be a little bit more skilled and aware of their sort of visibility and their stealth meter. So I think this is going to be a little bit more skillful play coming out of the assassination tree. Now the final passive for this skill line is called Pressure Points. Now this one is going to have it so each assassination ability you have slotted increases a critical strike rating by 3% or so. So this means you can just go full assassination and really bolster your critical strike rating. Now this is going to be one of those skills I think is going to be very potent kind of in the early levels and like the early dungeoning, and maybe even the early kind of raid scene or endgame PvE, and I guess PvP as well, that will probably wind up getting stale as you get gear. This is usually one of those things where gear will get to the point where you don't need the extra critical strike rating, so then you just don't utilize this ability at all. We'll have to see how sort of their take, Zenimax's take on using the gear and how controlled they keep the numbers, because it could get a little bit out of control, especially like post-release content that they add to the game if they add new armors and stuff like that. So all in all, the assassination skill line, well, it's very, very roguey. Pretty much what you would expect. There's a lot of sort of sneaky, backstabby goodness that you kind of want out of your typical fantasy RPG assassin, as it were. And I think people who like this stuff in RPGs and MMOs are going to enjoy taking some skills from the assassination tree. There's a nice enough mix here, though, that I can definitely see people going for a more lethal and nigh untouchable up-close sword play, especially if you grab skills kind of like haste and blur along with mark target. I think that these, coupled with maybe some other skills in the other trees we'll have to see, could make it so instead of going for burst down one-hit wonder kind of thing with the use of Deathstroke and the Master Assassin thing, you could instead go for more of, hey, I'm here, but you still can't get past me because I'm much more maneuverable than you with my haste and my blur, and I'm just so quick. In addition to those same skills, though, I could also foresee some tanking capability on the Nightblade if utilized properly, especially again with blur. Overall, it lends itself very well to the typical assassin archetypes of the fantasy setting we're getting with Elder Scrolls Online, and it looks like they made sure to make it just flexible enough that they could potentially entice players to think outside the box with this. So let's get on to the next skill line, shall we? Apologies for the clicking, couldn't find my page. Okay, here we go. Shadow. The next skill line for the Nightblade is Shadow, with ultimate ability coming up, Consuming Darkness, which is going to have a hefty ultimate price, way more than the previous ultimate. This is going to create an area of darkness for about 12 to 13 seconds or so. Enemies in the area are snared by about half. You're invisible while in the area. Attacking removes this effect for about a second or so, and allies in the area will be granted the synergy ability for Slip Away, allowing them to sort of get this invisibility as well. That's a pretty good utility ability, mainly with the stealth from Slip Away for your allies. This is going to be a pretty good PvP one, in my opinion. I'm not sure its uses in PvE. I suppose the snare and the CC will be there, but the thing is, when people normally play the roguey type character, odds are you're going for a damage kind of thing, right? And usually you leave the utility to someone who's not playing the damage, unless content just really needs it. So I'm guessing there will be content where maybe the Nightblade needs to utilize an ultimate like Consuming Darkness to bring some utility and some CC to a certain encounter, but for the most part I don't think this one's going to be used in PvE. PvP, on the other hand, I think it has great uses, especially with the group invisibility that can go along with that. Now on to the actives for this skill line. The first one we have here is called Aspect of Terror. Not Aspect of Tower, Terror. This is going to be an instant skill with a small radius, and it's essentially just going to fear two nearby enemies who are going to cower for a couple seconds. Typical fear CC, not much more to say about it, honestly. The next skill is called Path of Darkness. This is going to cause it so targets in front of you take a little bit of magic damage, but more importantly, it's going to create this sort of invisible path. Like, there's going to be this path summoned in front of you, and only the caster can see it, which would be you. And on this path, presumably the whole distance, right? It's going to lay down this couple meters long path in front of you, and it's going to increase movement speed by about 50%. The movement speed on that is pretty cool, and I like this idea of a gap closer with Path of Darkness, but you could potentially use this as an escape as well. When I read this skill, it instantly took me to the idea of, I believe it's Nocturne in League of Legends. I feel like somebody was playing League of Legends and was like, I really want this ability to lay down a path and then use that path to chase my enemy. I'm pretty sure that's where the inspiration for this ability came from. But I'm not complaining, that sounds awesome. Now the next ability we have here is called Shadow Cloak. This is going to make you invisible for a couple seconds, but to offset that, your magicka will not be regenerating while you are invisible. This is a typical stealth ability, but I'm not sure how I feel because that's all it does. It doesn't really do anything else. So maybe in the right combinations of skills and playstyles you could utilize this, but I'm not sure how well it's going to go over, mainly because it is only a couple seconds of stealth, which I think is the right way to handle stealth, but because there's no addition to this skill, I'm not sure how I feel about it currently. Now the next skill following Shadow Cloak is called Summon Shade. This is going to summon a shade, as you would expect, to attack enemies for about 20 seconds or so, and then attacked enemies are going to deal about 15 to 20% less damage for a couple seconds. Presumably what this is going to do is you're going to summon your little companion for about a third of a minute to a half of a minute or so, and it's going to just wreak havoc on targets. I'm hoping they allow you to control it during that full 20 seconds so that you can actually move it from target to target and spread this debuff around. If that's the case, this is going to be a pretty useful skill to lower damage on just yourself and allies. We'll have to see how well they allow sort of pet control in this game. But if it's how I think it should be, it could be a really potent and powerful skill in all kinds of content. Now finally, that brings us to Veiled Strike. This is going to require the caster to be in stealth, so this is, I guess, where Shadow Cloak comes into play. What it's going to do is cause a little bit of magic damage, and it's going to CC the enemy, and then after the CC for off balance wears off, they're going to be stunned for a couple seconds. This is a fairly cheap ability as well, while Shadow Cloak is not. I'm not sure how I feel about them being two separate, because they feel like they should maybe be the same skill, like Shadow Cloak / Veiled Strike. It'll be you go into the Shadow Cloak on the first button press, and then it'll activate the second ability when you're in stealth kind of thing. I'm not really sure how that works, but I guess they did it separately because you could use Shadow Cloak in other builds potentially. But yeah, let's move on to the passive, shall we? The first one up for the Nightblade in the Shadow skill line is called Dark Veil. This is going to increase the duration of your shadow abilities for a good percentage. It's pretty bland, but pretty nifty as well. The next one is Fortitude, which is just going to increase max health per shadow ability slotted. That's pretty interesting. It doesn't really fit the overall theme going on with this skill line. The next one is Refreshing Shadows. Activate a shadow ability, increases the stamina regeneration. Or your stamina regeneration rather, by about 30% for a couple seconds. That's pretty powerful actually. If you're using a lot of shadow based abilities from the skill line, you could just run around with near invincible, or not invincible, infinite amounts of stamina, which could be very useful if you're playing in this tree. So maybe you could build yourself to do more damage through different armor. For example, you could go cloth armor and build tons of magic damage, and then use this passive to pretty much make yourself have just enough stamina as if you would gauge yourself for having it. Now finally, the last one we have here is called Shadow Barrier. After coming out of Crouch, Stealth, or Invisibility, you're going to take about 35 to 50% less damage. Now this one is really good, and I feel like with the passives, they've had Shadow Barrier and Fortitude along with the Summon Shade, that maybe this could be where they're looking for a potential kind of off-tank style of play, and maybe even combined with the Blur and some of the other skills that we mentioned in the previous skill line, there could be some tanking potential with the Nightblade. Now this skill line overall I think is cool, but it's all over the place. It's got all the spells that you would kind of expect for the name Shadow. It's got some stealth and stuff like that, but besides all of the spells doing the Shadow and Darkness theme, there's just not a very cohesive feel. I think what they're going for was a fairly tough and mobile and all-around hard to target fighter who lurks in the shadows, and I guess in that front they were kind of successful, but I just don't see anyone being able to use just these skills. I think maybe some of the other skills have done this as well, and maybe that's their full-on intention, is like 1 or 2 skill lines to be the main, and then the other ones to be like your offset skills. I'm not sure how I feel about that, if that is their intention, but this definitely seems to be the case throughout all the other classes as well. I think this is going to be torn apart, to be honest. It's going to be used to bolster the other skill choices you've made already. You want to try your hand at a tanky rogue, like I mentioned with the assassination tree. Then you're going to grab the summon shade. You're going to utilize shadow barrier. You're going to use fortitude if you find enough shadow abilities to be useful. If you'd like to try the real bursty bastard of a rogue that just isn't ashamed to do it from behind and stab you when you're least expecting it, then you're going to grab a bunch of stealth skills from this one, and then you're going to build yourself for just amazing crits, and then use some skills from the assassination tree to get that damage you're looking for. As a skill line by itself, I don't think Shadow is all that appealing, but combined with the other potential skills we have available as a Nightblade, I think it'll work out well. Now, that brings me to the last skill line for the Nightblade, which is Siphoning. Oh, let me go back up. Goodness Lord, I'm losing things. Siphoning, as I was saying, is the name of the third and final skill line for the Nightblade. The ultimate ability for this skill line is called Soul Shred. This is going to have a small radius around it, with nearby enemies taking a good bit of magic damage, being stunned for about 3 to 4 seconds, and your allies can activate the Leeching Strike synergy, which is going to do significant damage that also steals life. Presumably what this is going to do is allow you to do some CC in that very small radius. It is very small. I should make sure to make that clear. But the Leeching Strike synergy ability could bolster your allies' health. So if you're in a tough situation, you can throw this out here and onto the battlefield, and then your allies can activate this Leeching Strike and get some health back for themselves. I think this is a pretty strong one. Its cost isn't nearly as high as the previous, and I think it actually has some more uses. So of the 3, I think this one is going to be a pretty useful one. I suppose the ability on Assassination is going to appeal more to the burst down DPS roles, as I kind of mentioned. Usually the people who like to play for that damage are usually going to build straight into that, and using an extra slot for their ultimate, which could be used for damage from the Assassination tree, or skill line rather. I'm not sure how this is going to appeal to those guys, but I'm sure this will have some uses in both PvE and PvP content when certain encounters come into play. Now finally, let's get to the actives here. We have Agony, which is going to stun the enemy target for a good chunk of time, and I do mean a good chunk. It's going to deal a little bit of magic damage over the duration, but the effect is going to be broken by damage from any other sources, be it you or your allies. Now this is a pretty damn cool spell, because pretty much what this is a toned down ESO version of like a polymorph, for example, or a hex, or just any of those very hard CCs which remove a target from battle. Now there's been a couple of those throughout the skill lines, but this is a pretty strong one. It's a little bit different, and it lends itself to the Nightblade archetype pretty well. It's just going to be a powerful spell all around. I'm sure this is going to be utilized a lot in content of both PvE and PvP sorts. Now the next one here is called Cripple. This is going to be an instant cast spell, which is going to siphon movement speed from the enemy and give it to yourself for about 8 to 9 seconds, and then throughout this duration it's going to deal 3 or 4 magic damage. Oh, Jesus, I'm mentioning numbers. Ignore the numbers. It's going to do a little bit, and I do mean a little bit of magic damage for every second that goes by on that. This is a cool one because it adds some movement speed to you while also crippling someone else. That's pretty damn interesting. I can't think of another skill which siphons off movement speed. That's a little bit odd compared to other MMOs. I think it's going to be useful for the people who can use it well in PvE. Like you find that one enemy that just needs to be slowed and kited. You could use that for this because it does have a little bit of range on it. So you could throw this out and kite for a while. That's going to be really useful. But more importantly, I think this is going to be like kite and control ability for PvP. This is going to be kind of a hindrance on some people who play PvP if you're hit by this over and over, because the cost isn't really that significant, but it can be really damn annoying. I can just tell you right now that Cripple is going to be an annoying skill to deal with. Now the next one here we have is called Drain Power, which is going to decrease the power of nearby enemies for a good chunk of percentage of their power anyway, and then your power is increased by a small percentage for each affected target. This is going to be really powerful in AoE situations, I feel. If you can get some AoE skills from other skill lines, either from the weapons, or maybe there's some laying around in this skill line or the other skill lines, you can really get yourself into a position to do a ton of AoE damage with this guy. It's pretty good as well for maybe a tank. This is one of those that could be used for a tank as well. It'll allow you to have some good DPS in a tank role while also lowering the damage that you take. So I think both of those are good uses for the Drain Power skill. Now the next one here is called Siphoning Strike, which is going to toggle on and off. There's been a couple toggle skills we've gone over so far, and this is going to make it so your basic weapon attacks are going to restore a small amount of magicka and stamina. About 10 or 15% of your basic weapon attacks are going to restore a little bit more magicka and stamina, and then your basic weapon attacks are going to deal a good chunk less damage. This is a pretty cool spell as well if you build yourself to just go through all of your magicka very quickly. I can definitely see a playstyle where you like burn as much as you can to get the most usage out of your full magicka and stamina bars, and then you just throw on Siphoning Strike to get it back as quickly as possible, and you just kind of throttle yourself depending on the situation to get the most damage as possible without just burning all of your resources. I'm a fan of this kind of skill and the playstyle that it could sort of give players if they want to use this skill. Excuse me, goodness. Now the next skill we have is called Strike. This is going to deal a little bit of magic damage from a distance, and then you're going to be healed for about a third of the damage done every 2 seconds for about 10 or 15 seconds. This is a pretty powerful spell as well. This could allow you to get some health back, and I think combined with Cripple, for example, you could use this as a way to kite and stay alive. So this is going to be a pretty interesting combination of skills if you want to use it for that kind of role in a PvE or PvP situation where you need to kite or keep someone from running rampant pretty much, and you can also keep yourself alive. That's pretty cool. Now on to the passives. We have, oh wait, nope. Oh yes, goodness, losing myself. Catalyst, which is going to just bolster your potion effectiveness by about 20% or so. Very bland, but it's the only passive or any ability really that I've seen that that makes sure to bolster potion effectiveness. So we'll see. It just depends on how well those consumables are actually used in the game, and if there's any real priority to using them commonly, I should say. The next ability we have here is called Magicka Flood, which is going to just increase your max magicka by about 8 to 10% while you have siphoning abilities slotted. This is, like the others, just going to give you some extra bonus for using skills in this skill line. The extra magicka is pretty interesting because it's usually been damage on most of these, so I'm glad to see it's a little bit different there. The next one we have is called Soul Siphoner. This is going to increase the healing taken from your siphoning abilities by 15%. This one is going to really keep your health up there, and is another skill that kind of lends itself to maybe a tank possibility. The final passive here is called Transfer, and this one is just going to cause you to gain extra ultimate when dealing damage with siphoning abilities. Now, overall, I think that the siphoning skill line is kind of like the shadow skill line in that it seems pretty varied. It's not as much, though. It's not quite as varied as the shadow one was, mainly because the overall theme here is obviously to drain enemy life and to bolster your own health. In reviewing this skill line, I suppose Zenimax was kind of attempting to give us a tank in the Nightblade, but rather than the evasion style tank that you would kind of expect from a roguish type character, we're given more of the self-healing tank style, which is actually quite fun from my own experience. I think together, coupled with some skills from Shadow and maybe one or two from Assassination, there is definitely potential for a very viable tank in the siphoning skill line, and is easily attainable for the Nightblade, and I can't imagine it being too difficult for a tanking Nightblade to come into play with the skills that we have available in siphoning. No, so what are my thoughts on Nightblade as a whole? Well, to be completely frank, I'm actually a little bit underwhelmed, but I think that's mostly because I just wasn't expecting this kind of skill setup for the Nightblade. I was fully prepared for the typical skill line, kind of like Assassination, but I was hoping they would do something really interesting and out of the box with the other two skill lines. And instead, much like the Sorcerer, there doesn't seem to be 3 separate skill lines, but rather there's 2 skill lines that would normally be combined into one class, or the 2 themes are normally combined into one sort of archetype in one play style, with the third one kind of doing its own thing, in this case the Assassination Tree, and for the Sorcerer it was the Storm Calling. I guess at the end of the day, though, it doesn't really matter, because you can just take all the skills that you want and hybrid to your heart's content, and I guess in the end that means they're successful, because I definitely see a lot of potential in peppering your hotbar with skills from all 3 of the available skill lines from the Nightblade, and more importantly, I guess building your character in whatever fashion you want is what ESO is all about with their skill line system. So in the end, the Nightblade gets a thumbs up, I suppose. It's easily my least favorite of the classes, though, and I guess ESO is just taking the roguish assassin type character to a place that just isn't for me. But you know what, that's okay. But yeah, that'll do it for me, guys, on this episode of Delving Deep ESO. Let me know what you guys think of the Nightblade skill set, and how do you think you will build your own character if you're interested in playing a Nightblade class in Elder Scrolls Online. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video even a little bit and you care to see the channel grow, I would very much appreciate a thumbs up, a subscribe, a comment down below on anything about the content in this video, anything Elder Scrolls Online, MMO, or gaming related in the slightest. Thanks again for watching, guys. This has been Pulse going over all of the ESO goodness, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.